Caroline is a big Taylor Swift fan, and for her birthday back in February, Rebecca managed to secure tickets to Taylor Swift. So we were there with all those screaming girls. I still have ringing in my ears. And Rebecca said, well, how are you going to work Taylor Swift into the sermon today, Padre? And I said, well, that's not going to be too hard because I've got one song stuck in my head. And you fellows who listen to Taylor Swift may appreciate this. She had one song that she just did really very well at the end of the show called Trouble. And she sings it over and over again. Trouble, trouble, trouble. I knew you were trouble when you walked in. Now, she's singing, yeah, you know that song. It sticks in your head, doesn't it? Don't you love it that I brought that to church today and now it's stuck in your head? Life is full of trouble. Life is full of trouble. And this past week, I've dealt with two particular women that have more than their share of trouble. It's not hard when you think of people in trouble to think of Job. And so I think it's particularly appropriate that our Old Testament lesson today is from that great book. By the way, we're seeing the cherry on the sundae of the Job story. All of the trials and tribulations that Job has been through are now over in today's lesson in the Old Testament. And Job is now living another full 140 years. His family is restored, and boy, he has one heck of a herd, doesn't he? If any of y'all, we're entering the season of nativity, if any of y'all ever go to a living nativity, think of Job today when you go up to that camel and smell that thing. Because Job is rewarded for his efforts with 6,000 camels. That is a smell for the ages. So Job makes it through his trials and tribulations, and the part of our Old Testament lesson I want you to hang on to today is the very first words. Job says, I know you can do all things, Lord. I know you can do all things. It's easy to forget that when you get into trouble. And these two women I've been talking with over the last few months, but in particular have heard from this week, seem to be stuck in their trouble and speaking a little bit like Job spoke when he was in the middle of his trials and tribulations. The first is in her mid-70s, has lost her job, has no sense of security for the future, is stuck in a house that she's lived in for nearly 50 years, that's deep underwater financially, and is really deeply concerned about what God has in store for her. And every time I hear from her, the message is the same. I'm scared and I can't move. Not just literally. She can't move. She's paralyzed with fear. In a totally different state, another woman that I've been talking to has the same problem. She's divorced, living in a house that is much bigger than she needs for her two kids in some kind of part-time child custody arrangement. The house is a tremendous financial burden to her. Her business is failing. Her divorce just got finalized a couple of months ago, and she is terrified. Every time I speak with her on the phone, it takes about 30 seconds for her to start crying. And almost word for word, she says what this other woman, who she has no idea exists, says, I'm terrified, and I can't move, paralyzed with fear. And so we find ourselves looking at the lesson today from Job and saying, well, how did Job fare through these trials and tribulations? Obviously, he lived a long and healthy life. His family came back, and he was restored with, at least in those days, tremendous riches of these giant herds. So Job made it through with the recognition that God can do all things. All he has to do is incline his ear. In that way, then, Job and these two women that I've been talking with over the last few months have a very similar fate and station in life that Bartimaeus does. Bartimaeus in Aramaic, there's a lot of discussion about what that means translated, but Bartimaeus probably means son of Timaeus. Timaeus is mentioned earlier in Scripture as also being blind. So when we see that Jesus' miracle of healing Bartimaeus' blindness, it's important for us to just recognize this isn't just a blind man. This is a son of a blind man. Double the miracle, if you will. Everybody who read that in those times knew that that's what that meant. There was a deeper meaning there. But notice, bless you, notice how this story unfolds. Notice how the story unfolds. Bartimaeus is blind, and Scripture tells us is a beggar on the side of the road from Jericho to Jerusalem. Literally, we can kind of imagine what that looks like. We've seen blind people begging before on the side of the road, and we can imagine just how decrepit this poor man is. And when Jesus and his disciples are leaving Jericho and heading to Jerusalem, does Bartimaeus lay there? No. He reaches out. Think back for a minute. For those of you who still have your bulletins with you, think back for a minute and look at the psalm. Look at today's psalm, verse 4. Father Bob, would you mind if I don't mind you putting you on the spot? Would you mind reading verse 4 for us?
I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me out of all my terror.
I sought the Lord, and he delivered me out of all my terror. Isn't that something? Bartimaeus could have laid there. He could have accepted the life that he had been given, and yet he sought the Lord. He inclined his ear. He reached out to Jesus, and he did so in a very particular way, didn't he? He didn't say, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ, come here. What did he say? He said it twice in our gospel lesson today. Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me. And he did it in such a loud and embarrassing way that Scripture tells us the people were like, shh, Bartimaeus, shut up. Quiet down. That's Jesus. He's got someplace to go. But that, brothers and sisters, is the point. Jesus had somewhere to go, and it was Bartimaeus' role to follow him. In the Gospel of Mark, there are a number of healing stories. There are a number of miracles that take place. But only one person, after being healed in the Gospel of Mark, becomes a disciple. And that is our friend, Bartimaeus. Everyone else kind of heads on their way. The last verse of today's gospel lesson tells us Bartimaeus, once healed, once his sight is restored, what's he do? He gets in line with everybody else. All he had to do was cry out for mercy, just like in the psalm, just like in Job, and his prayers were answered. So trouble is part of life. Trouble is part of life, just like Taylor Swift said in that song. But if you reach out to God, incline your ear to him, he will incline his ear to you. Now here's the kicker. He doesn't always do so in the way that you think he will. He doesn't always do so in the way that you think he will. Bartimaeus may have been perfectly content living on the outside of Jericho, being a beggar. Yeah? He may have been just fine doing that. But when the opportunity arose and he reached out to Jesus and said, have mercy on me, Jesus said, go, your faith has made you well. And with that newfound wellness, that newfound spirit, that newfound cleanliness, Bartimaeus became a disciple. So this week, as you head into the week filled with trouble, I hope that you will incline your ear to God and that you will say a prayer, a very simple prayer. Lord, what is it that you wish for me? I am reaching out to you in a time of trouble. What is it that you want for me? What purpose, as Job says, I know you can do all things. No purpose of yours shall be thwarted. What purpose is it of yours that you would like me to fill? Say that simple prayer, folks, because I think if you do just that one simple moment this week full of trouble, then you'll realize that God has a purpose for you. And we can all, like Bartimaeus, fall into line and become better disciples of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.